Hello, economics students. Today we're going to talk about the different types of economic systems that have existed in the world. I've got some pictures here on the screen that deal with four different types of economic systems that we're going to cover today in class. Just real quickly taking a look at these. Here you see some kids. This picture was taken in the United States about 100 years ago, maybe a little more than 100 years ago. These are children who work in coal mines, and they actually represent an economic system which I might call laissez-faire capitalism. That is unfettered capitalism, where the government basically just lets a company do whatever that company wants to do, and that could include hiring an 11-year-old to work a 10-hour shift inside of a coal mine. So that's one type of economic system. Here's another type of economic system. If you recognize that script up here, that is Russian. And this picture represents Soviet Russian style communism. Here we have another one. This picture was taken in Africa. Those are Maasai tribal people. Excuse me. And that would represent a traditional economic system where customs and tradition basically define what you're going to do with your economic life. And for the Maasai tribes people, that means they're more than likely going to be cattle herders. And then you have over here in the bottom left a caution sign, which gets us into really what most countries are today, and that's a sort of a mixed economy where the government does have some input into how companies operate, although most companies have a large amount of freedom to do whatever they want to do, but within a governmental regulatory structure, and in this case represented by a caution sign, the government requiring people to wear safety glasses inside this facility. So, moving on. All economic systems basically have to answer three questions. What goods and services are we going to produce? How will they be produced? And who's going to consume them? So are we going to use our wood to build a house, to make furniture, or to make pencils? And if so, once we make that decision, how are we going to go about producing them? Is it going to be very labor intensive, or is it going to be more capital intensive? And who are we making these products for? Who is going to buy the finished product? So those are the three basic questions, and then different economic systems will answer these questions differently. So, a few definitions. First of all, free enterprise, where people are free to make their own choices in their economic roles. Pure free enterprise is also called laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire is a French term, which basically means leave it alone. And laissez-faire capitalism would be a system of capitalism where there's very little or no government regulation, that businesses are pretty much free to do whatever they feel they need to do. There's also a command economy where the government holds most property rights. In other words, the government has control over those productive resources of land, labor, and capital. There's two basic types of command economies, which we'll get into in a bit. Finally, we have a traditional economy where people rely on custom or tradition to make their production decisions. That is, what are we going to do economically, how are we going to do it, and for whom? Now, there's very few of these three elements in existence today that are pure. Okay, there's a mix. All of these kind of mix around a little bit. So today we have mostly a mixed economy where our economic systems incorporate elements of free enterprise, command, and traditional economy. However, some economies lend more towards the command side. Today, most lend themselves more towards the free enterprise side. But we all also have a little bit of traditional economy in there as well. So let's focus today mainly not on free enterprise, because that's going to be the gist of most of this semester. But what I want to focus on today are the others, command, and a little bit on the traditional economy as well. So let's start with command economies. There's two kinds of command economies, and the first is communism. Communism, definition, the common ownership of all productive resources, land, labor, and capital. Common ownership of the productive resources. Those productive resources are managed by the communist government, which in effect represents everyone. Now, what you have to understand is when the government manages those resources, that really means that the government kind of owns those resources. And they even own your labor to the extent to which the government can dictate to you what kind of job you are going to do. You don't have the freedom necessarily to determine what you want to do for your livelihood. The government tells you. Pure communism allows for the common ownership of personal property, not just the productive resources, but personal property like clothes and furniture. In Soviet Union, the old days, you were free to go ahead and buy your own furniture and clothes. The government didn't tell you what to wear. But in a pure communist country, the government could go so far as to tell you what to wear, such as what existed in communist China back in the 1960s, where everyone had to wear basically the same kind of outfit, which we used to call a Mao suit. So that's pure communism. There are no pure communist countries today, but there are still a few communist countries around where the productive resources are controlled by the government. And in a communist system, that government is likely to be authoritarian, meaning that the government has the authority over the people. It's not the people with the authority over the government. There's another kind of command economy. The second type of command economy is fascism. Now, the word fascism has a lot of meaning to it beyond just economics, but there is an economic element to fascism. So in a fascist system, private ownership of productive resources is allowed, but the government can still determine how those resources will be used. So even though you can own the productive resources, you don't have the complete freedom to use those resources as you would like to. The government controls that. So the difference between communism and fascism, in communism, the government actually manages or owns those productive resources. In fascism, you can have private ownership, but the government still controls how the resources will be used. And typically in a fascist system, the ownership of those productive resources will be limited to a certain elite class, and that elite class could be political or industrial or ethnic elites. Okay, so in Nazi Germany, for example, it was the ethnic Germans who were allowed to own the productive resources. If you were Jewish, you were not considered an ethnic German. You could not own productive resources. And also, political participation may be limited to those elites, and this too would be an authoritarian system. Here's an interesting picture that I think illustrates fascism quite well. You notice the emblems up here. This is in Nazi Germany. This photograph was taken in the 1930s, late 1930s. And notice the cars. These are Volkswagens, okay? Now, Volkswagen was actually originally produced by the company Porsche. And Porsche was known for its nice, fancy sports cars. But Hitler came to power, and he was upset that everyone in America who wanted a car pretty much in the 1930s could afford to get a car. That wasn't the case in Germany, and Hitler wanted a car made that any German could afford. And he went to Porsche, and he basically told Porsche, I want you to make a low-cost car that any German can afford. And the result of that was Porsche used its resources at the command of Adolf Hitler to make the Volkswagen. And Volkswagen simply is German for the people's car. So whether or not Porsche wanted to make the Volkswagen, the government told him he had to make it. That's a very good illustration of what fascism is. The production facilities were owned by Porsche, not the government, but Porsche did not have the freedom to use those resources in the way that they wanted to. Here's another sort of a cartoonish picture. This represents the flag of Honduras. Okay, the Honduran flag is a blue stripe, a white stripe, and a blue stripe. And then within the white stripe are 5 stars. Now here, the flag has been altered to the shape of the country of Honduras. And instead of stars, we have bananas. Honduras traditionally was a fascist system where the government was really controlled by the company, United Fruit Company, which was involved in the production of bananas. And basically, it was fascist in the sense that the industrial elites basically controlled the government in such a way that people were forced into the production of bananas. You had to use your private resources to make bananas. If I were a worker, I had to work in the banana plantation. I didn't have the freedom to go start my own business somewhere or to go into competition with the United Fruit Company. It was a fascist system, a different type of fascism controlled by industrial elites. Okay, then we have traditional economies. In a traditional economy, the decisions are determined by tradition. No big surprise there. In a traditional economy, the society is going to be very resistant to technological change. Why is that? Well, because tradition dictates how we're going to do things. New technology is not a part of tradition. So they're going to be very hesitant to adopt new technology in a traditional economy. So some examples, you can probably think of some, but I'll go ahead and give you a few. India has a caste system. Now, the caste system in India is no longer legal, but it still exists informally, where if you were born into a family, for example, of shoemakers, cobblers, then you're probably going to be a cobbler yourself. The caste system of India pretty much says that you're going to follow in the same traditional employment area as your ancestors did. The Maasai cattle herders, if you're born into the Maasai tribe of Africa, you are almost certainly going to be a cattle herder. Amazonian tribal people, same kind of thing, or the Pacific Island Aborigines. These are all traditional economic systems that these people use. And even here in the United States, the Amish people are very hesitant to technological change. They still ride in horse-drawn buggies. They typically do not have electricity running into their homes. So we have little elements of traditional economy even in the United States, and the Amish would represent one of those where they're all farmers following very traditional methods of farming. Finally, we do have mixed economies. Nearly every system today is a mixed economy. There are very few pure economic systems in existence today. Modern countries incorporate elements of each type of economy into their economic laws and political systems. So think about the United States. In the United States, we have elements of the traditional economy, such as the Amish. We have elements of command economy, where the government forces companies to abide by certain regulations, whether that's, ecological, environmental regulations or safety regulations. Any kind of government dictates to a company. That's an element of command economy. In the communist countries, China officially is communist, but really it isn't anymore, because China has introduced a whole lot of free enterprise elements into their economy. And if you get into the countryside of China, you will find lots of traditional economic activity there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just run through this real quickly. Some elements, how the government does get involved in a mixed economy, especially that of the United States. Government ownership of certain industries like the postal service or the passenger train industry. Amtrak is government owned. Price regulations on utilities such as electricity and natural gas. Safety regulations, anti-monopoly, tariffs and taxes. Taxing is a type of government command in the command economy. Government subsidies. We're going to get into that later, but that's basically where the government helps companies stay profitable in the production of certain goods and services. Publicly owned land. The government owns a lot of land in the United States. So suffice it to say, we have the three basic types of economic systems. Every country in the world is going to fall somewhere in this triangle. In the United States, we're going to fall up here towards the free enterprise point. Cuba, a communist country, they still have some free enterprise and some traditional. They're going to be more down here somewhere. A country like India has a strong traditional economic element still. They're going to be more over here somewhere. But everyone falls within this triangle, just closer to one of these points than other countries are. With that, I'm going to stop this presentation. As always, check Canvas to make sure there's that you see any kind of assignment that might be in Canvas. I'm not sure if there is today or not. And with that, I'll sign off, and you guys have a great day.